This is Bill Sullivan. I'm a family physician based at St. Michael's Academic Family Health Team and Surrey Place. And I'm presenting today on advanced care planning for adults with developmental disabilities during the COVID-19 pandemic. Just wanted to mention that I am also an associate professor in the Faculty of Medicine at the University of Toronto. There's no conflicts of interest. And just to point out that the information in this webinar has been peer-reviewed and is evidence-based. So let's get started. I'm hoping that by the end of this session, you will be able to describe advanced care planning and why it is important in the context of COVID-19, and to apply a promoting decisions-making capabilities approach to advanced care planning. And thirdly, to use a COVID-19 advanced care planning tool to guide you through a process adapted for adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and to document the results of this process. So let's get started with the first objective. What is advanced care planning during the COVID-19 pandemic? I wanted to emphasize that advanced care planning is a process and it involves several players. It requires conversations, often more than one conversation, with many people who might be involved in various support roles of adults with intellectual disabilities. So this is just an example of a patient named Fatima. Just an example. She's a young woman with an intellectual and developmental disability who is supported by several members who are shown around her. Her family physician, the developmental services case manager, her substitute decision makers who happen to be her best friends, and others who know her well, including the group home administrator and a personal support professional. So what I want you to be thinking about as we go through this is how we could help Fatima and promote this process of advanced care planning that would bring together the various people that would be involved. I also want to emphasize that you do have a role in this, and I hope by the time we finish this presentation, you can be convinced of that. So the goal of advanced care planning is to help persons like Fatima discuss and express to their substitute decision makers what she would want or not want for her health care, especially and particularly when she can no longer contribute to making healthcare decisions. It is not to guide healthcare providers directly, and whatever is stated in an advanced care plan does not give consent to proposed treatments that will occur in the future. That is always the role of the substitute decision maker. So, can adults with intellectual disabilities actually participate in advanced care planning? It is important to realize that most can, at least to some degree, but they might need support from persons who know them well. So in a person-centered healthcare approach, we strive to involve patients as much as possible in planning their healthcare. This could include advanced care planning. However, research shows that adults with intellectual disabilities are often not involved in making such decisions. They are also seldom engaged in advanced care planning. Few have advanced care plans regardless of their decision-making capabilities. And even though advanced care planning is for future treatments, research does suggest that those who have been involved in advanced care planning can actually do better at making decisions about healthcare in general. And adults can make a sense, can develop a sense that their goals and values matter in their treatment decisions. And this process is also important because it can identify needed, excuse me, needed healthcare decision-making supports. So why is advanced care planning especially important during a pandemic? It's estimated that although most people who develop COVID-19 will recover, many advanced care plans have the context of end-of-life care, which doesn't quite correspond to this context. For instance, the mortality rate of people with confirmed diagnosis of COVID-19 is around 6% and estimated to be less than 1% if you consider everyone who has been infected but not tested. So if an adult with intellectual disabilities has an advanced care plan for end-of-life care, it should be reviewed in this context. Still, it is important to think about what treatments an adult with IDD would want or not want if he or she were to develop a serious COVID-19 illness and require hospital care. Adults with IDD have a high prevalence of those health conditions that put them at increased risk of developing serious COVID-19 illness, things like hypertension, diabetes, heart disease, and lung disease. Also, the experience of hospital care will be different during the pandemic. There will be a requirement to be isolated, possibly no visitors. People will be wearing protective equipment, and there may well be fewer resources. Advanced care planning might limit some of the trauma of possible hospital care and following discharge by identifying needed supports. So I'll just move now to our next topic of capabilities approach to advanced care planning during COVID-19. So as mentioned, the advanced care planning process can foster decision-making capabilities of adults with intellectual disabilities. A capabilities approach would, first of all, recognize that decision-making is relational with adults with IDD. It would promote their participation as much as possible in such planning, and this approach is consistent in recognizing both a person-centered healthcare approach and people's rights under the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. To be capable of making decisions regarding present and future medical treatments, some adults with IDD might need accommodations. These would include adapting the advanced care planning process to their level of understanding and preferred ways of communicating, incorporating more time if needed, and engaging help from others or decision-making supporters. The Developmental Disabilities Primary Care Program has developed a tool to guide assessment of capacity of adults with intellectual disabilities that considers their needs for such accommodations. And this document is available at this link on the DDPCP website, and it walks you through issues of actually accommodating adults with intellectual disabilities so that they can participate as much as possible in decision-making about their health care. So now to our third issue, the tool for advanced care planning. So I will just walk through these various steps that are key distinctions that are made in this tool. And it is specifically designed for the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. So the first step involves identifying the person's substitute decision maker and a backup substitute decision maker. And as you can see, the tool provides plain language for people that are guiding the person with the disability through this process to ask these sorts of questions. I guess one of the first parts of the tool is to make sure that the person does have a substitute decision maker and that the person who is so named is willing to take on this role. So some people already have legally appointed substitute decision makers, such as by the court, but others will have family members who just by default will be the substitute decision maker according to the Ontario Healthcare Consent Act. These family members might already have been involved as substitute decision makers in making some health care decisions for the adult with intellectual and developmental disabilities. But the advanced care planning process should confirm that these family members are the people whom the adult with IDD wants to make decisions for them when the adult becomes incapable, and that their substitute decision makers are willing and available to take on this role. So recall in Fatima's case, although there were family members present or available, she preferred her best friends instead to act in this role. So if this is not the case, if the person does want to name, say, a family member, they should be supported to appoint an attorney for personal care, and this can specify that it is for healthcare decisions. To do so, they do not have to meet the typical capacity test for treatment under the Healthcare Consent Act. They only need to be able to indicate first that they trust the persons they want to appoint as their attorneys, and second, that these persons will be making decisions for them when they cannot themselves. So that's all they need to be able to do with supports, of course. So in the appendix to the tool, we have provided such a letter, and it is kind of a plain language letter for appointing an attorney for a power of attorney for personal care, and it specifies that this is for health decisions, although that could be made more broadly if desired. And it is just indicates who can witness this form, and that the person with the disability has to, the witnesses need to attest that they do understand the two criteria mentioned previously, and by witnessing the document, this becomes legal. I also wanted to point out that the substitute decision maker is involved in this process, and we recommend that they understand their role and that they be provided with some relevant information at a basic level about COVID-19 and different levels of care. So the tool has an appendix with information that can be used in such discussions with substitute decision makers. So part B of the tool engages the adult with IDD to gain a sense of his or her present values and goals. These goals and values are important for substitute decision makers to deliberate when thinking about levels of care for the person. Having a sense of who the adult with IDD is and his or her life before COVID-19 helps to establish a baseline description that can help with various decisions that might need to be made, and about needed supports if they're in hospital. It can also help the substitute decision maker to determine whether a person's momentary refusal or resistance to a treatment, especially when they're ill and frightened, is consistent or not with what he or she would want based on their goals and values as discussed in this document. So this is just an example of what this section B looks like. The writing might be too small, but essentially there are 3 steps. The first is engaging with the adult with IDD in answering some questions, and it provides plain language examples of such questions. The second is to elicit input of persons who know the adult with IDD well. And thirdly, it prompts for additional materials that could be included, such as photos of the adult with IDD engaging in activities with people that they enjoy, etc. So part C of this tool starts with exploring the person's understanding of COVID-19 and hospital care during the pandemic and educating the person accordingly. The tool gives examples of plain language scripts for educating. It also provides links to picture books and other helpful teaching tools that can be used, just so that they understand what it is that's being discussed. It also asks whether the person wishes to continue to discuss preferences for future treatments. The person might prefer to leave these decisions to the substitute decision maker in discussions with the healthcare provider, or talk about this at a later time. This can be a sort of a delicate topic, but if the person is willing, they certainly need to be invited and supported to be involved in these difficult conversations. So this involves asking about preferences for hospital care. It provides some questions that can help to identify needed accommodations and additional supports for hospital stay or for certain treatments. It also has links to talking books, such as the one called Jack Plans Ahead for Coronavirus, which is a one in the series of Books Beyond Words. It's freely available online. So in discussing preferences, it's important to strike a balance between being too specific and too vague to provide helpful guidance for substitute decision makers. To describe scenarios of hospital care and treatments, it can be helpful to use analogies that are familiar with the person. Here, for example, is an image of snorkeling as an analogy for intubation. So these last 2 topics are also important to discuss. The adult with IDD might need supports to understand death. Research shows that with such supports, many are able to be so engaged. To explore whether the adult with IDD would want to live longer, even at the risk of poorer functional and mental health outcomes, it is important to frame this discussion properly so that one is talking about the possibility of additional supports should they be needed, and not merely about kind of the negative side of this. It is important to discuss death as a possible outcome of being seriously ill with COVID-19, but again, to frame this discussion in such a way that what is being sought is what the person would want while living with a life-limiting illness. and it provides some language around that. And finally, a very important part of this whole process is to make sure that, that this advanced care plan is accessible at a time when healthcare decisions are needed. So substitute decision makers should have a paper copy and be familiar with the plans. And everyone in the person's circle of care should know that the plan exists and where to find it. And then it gives suggestions about how to make the plan available by many means at the time when it might be needed. For instance, there is a hospital transfer package that is part of the resources that have been developed on the Developmental Disabilities Primary Care website. And the advanced care plan can be part of that package. It can also be something that the family physician has, and it's connected to the cumulative patient profile. And then other suggestions, such as making sure that it's part of the DSO records, Developmental Services Ontario, and even they could possibly be uploaded to Connecting Ontario, which is an accessible database that all physicians can access in Ontario. Another thought would be something like a medic alert that could contain key elements of such a directive, and a phone alert. So, just in summary, we've covered these three areas, described what advanced care planning is and why it is important in the context of hospital care for COVID-19. And by now, I think you will also be able to apply a promoting decision-making approach to advanced care planning and know how to use the COVID-19 advanced care plan tool to guide you through a process specific to adults with IDD in the context of COVID and to document these results. So the big question is, do I have a role? And I would like to insist that absolutely you do. This process needs to be undertaken urgently in the context of the pandemic for this information to be available if it should be needed. And to get this done urgently, there needs to be some leadership to facilitate the process. But it is a role that a family physician could undertake, but they need not be the person to lead and facilitate that. So the key point is that this is a way of helping to bridge the world of healthcare and the world of developmental services. And as I mentioned, the leader or facilitator doesn't have to do everything. He or she can engage other persons on the team to participate in various parts of this process. So thank you very much. This is a website where these tools can be found, and further information about contacting me through Surrey Place. And here are some resources that I just wanted to flag. Both, again, the website with these tools, H-Card, and Surrey Place information on COVID, and Speak Up Ontario is an excellent resource regarding goals of care discussions. And finally, I will end with these references. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope that you will be motivated to facilitate advanced care planning discussions for people with intellectual disabilities in the context of COVID-19. Thank you very much.